either to assert the right or to protect the right. In what context would it arise? What is this right? Why this right? How has the Indian court, the American courts looked at it? So I have put together a PowerPoint with the help of my team consisting of Ekalavya, Apurva, Venkatraman, and Akila. But before we get there, just to give you an overview, because most of us are familiar with this right, it is a fundamental right. It is couched as free speech, but as is well known and as Dr. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly, it is far too obvious that free press is part of free speech. It's a fundamental right, and hence it is a limitation on the legislative power. It is withdrawn from the majority. It is withdrawn and kept in the chapter pertaining to fundamental rights. It's not an absolute right. It is expressly subject to reasonable restrictions. And as already Krishnaswamy Iyer would say in the Constituent Assembly, as already Krishnaswamy Iyer would say, that we did not want it to be left. We did not want it to be left to the vicissitudes of the judiciary. So they couched the reasonable restriction. We will see the broad heads. But what I have tried to do today is, after arguing for the justification for free speech, it is far too well known, but there are some classic passages which have stuck in memory. So we have collected a few of them. We get to the interface that the press has had with the legislature, with the executive, and with the judiciary. The press being the fourth estate. By convention, it has come to be known as the fourth estate. The three pillars are well entrenched in the Constitution. The fourth pillar is well entrenched. What's the difference? The difference is the fourth pillar has to resort to the judiciary. And very often post-infringement or a post-arising of an apprehension. So in that sense, there is a qualitative difference. The legislature has, to its advantage, the power to enact a law. It has the privilege power, the breach of privilege power, to protect any assault on its independence, its dignity, its independence and its dignity. The executive, of course, is powerful. It has the executive machinery, the second organ. Judiciary has the power of contempt, the power to pass gag orders. It has a mechanism to protect itself. The press has very often looked to the judiciary. It has only looked to the judiciary. We will see in the interface with the legislature how certain laws were enacted, deliberately anti-press, anti-free press. One would have thought that with the fundamental right being entrenched, laws would be aligned. We will see what Gautam Bhatia in his book Offend, Shock and Disturb, a useful book of which I have made some references in my PowerPoint, how he deals with section 95 in the Code of Criminal Procedure as to how it is couched with a total subjective satisfaction to the executive to ban publications, how the courts have interpreted that provision. We will of course see section 66A, the last rites of which were performed in the Shreya Singhal judgment, and that judgment traces the metamorphosis of 19(1)A from an apprehension of breach of peace to advocacy to now incitement or an imminent threat of lawlessness. How we have aligned to the Brandenburg test in the US, that is to show the metamorphosis with the judiciary. We will also see the executive role and how the press has been the favorite whipping boy. The worst relationship has been with the executive. Ban on circulation, reduction in import of newsprint, making newsprint import difficult, I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty facts, but I'm telling you because as practitioners, we need to, while very often asserting this right, because it will be for the government to defend, we need to know the contours laid out by the court. We will, of course, see the judgments in Ramesh Thapa till Anuradha Bhasin, the recent ones, and the book ban cases. We will see the privileges being exercised by the legislature and how 19(1)(a) is today made to cede to the powers of the legislative privilege. There is a debate in the academia on that. We will see the judiciary's power of contempt. We will also see the threat from within the press and what the Supreme Court had to say with the press being controlled by industrial barons who have their vested interests. We will, of course, see a report by the Hoot Committee, as they call, as to where the threat to the press has arisen from warlords, drug traffickers, police, and from a whole host of, personnel. And then see whether there is a need to evolve a protection for them, either in the form of a judicial ombudsman who would sanction prosecution, some kind of a protection before defamation actions are launched. I know that there is a scope for abuse of this freedom, but is it better to err on the side of caution? If public servants can have a sanction to prosecute provision, is it time that we incorporate for the press a protection? All that will be required is a judge to look into before an action for defamation is launched. Because freedom of speech and consequently freedom of press is a very cherished right. The public have a right to know. The press purveys the information. Any shackling, any inhibition of that right, any shackling or any inhibition of that right would operate to the detriment of democracy. So with this overview, let us run through the PowerPoint and then we will, as we go along, develop it, because we are a set of practitioners. We need to see this law in its application. How would it be of use if we are faced with a newspaper, as I was faced a couple of years back with the Hindu having received a privilege notice, breach of privilege notice from the Maharashtra Assembly, because a news item appeared about a husband of a minister, which minister was an MLA, abusing the position to get contracts to lay roads. What would be the ground to challenge the notice, and at what stage would you challenge it? We advised a challenge at the notice stage and said, as per the law laid down in Keshav Singh and other cases, unless the activity has a nexus with the legislative activity, privilege would not lie. Fortunately, when the notice went from the Supreme Court, the Assembly gracefully withdrew the proceedings. But you could be faced with clients who come with a book which is banned, cinemas which are banned, circulation banned, heavy increase in newsprint duty, effectively curtailing the press, because then automatically they will not be able to afford it, which means they will not be able to purvey the news. Passing orders reducing the extent of newsprint that can be used. Actions for defamation against public officials. How would you defend? How would you prosecute? Obscenity, very frequently resorted to charge, and one of our leading actors from the state, Khushbu, had brought it up right up to the Supreme Court, and the law has undergone a change from the Hicklin test to the community standard test. And then let us see if we can draw some conclusion. So with that, if I can walk you through the PowerPoint, because I don't want to enter into a monologue. I thought this way we will commonly derive some benefit. Of course, this is all well known. Free speech subject to the 6 heads of restriction. Subsection 2 alone: sovereignty, security of state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt, defamation, incitement. Express words of the Constitution. This is a very famous passage from Milton. Every free speech book or an article begins with the Areopagitica. Look at how nicely he phrases it, and as we lead to why free speech, because very often we take it for granted, but why free speech? When we are not able to express ourselves in a community, forget the state being involved, we feel inhibited. There is a tension within. You feel frozen, and that doesn't bring out your personality. Imagine if the state were to exercise its power and to cause a chilling effect. Why free speech? People have debated on this. There are some classic passages. We'll see that. And look what Milton says. As good almost kill a man as kill a good book. Who kills a man kills a reasonable creature, God's image. But he who destroys a good book kills reason itself, kills the image of God, as it were, in the eye. And again, give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience, above all liberties. Very similar to what Socrates said on his sentencing, that if you are going to kill me with the bargain that I will let you go if you don't speak your mind, I would rather die and speak my mind and answer the gods rather than answer you. Far too obvious that free speech is included in the freedom of the press. What are the questions? Why this free speech? Is a very important question. People have adverted to it, got behind it. What is so great about it? You can live without speech, but they say it is a foundation for democracy. It is essential to bring out the true personality for a meaningful existence. And then we will see, as I said, the interface, because as a fourth organ, you test that with the treatment that it has received from the other three. Then we will see that what has shackled the blossoming, and then threats from within and the steps to be taken. Now, some of the reasons as concepts are need to make informed choices. For example, we lawyers, Supreme Court pronounces a lot of judgment. We have the law reports which carry the judgment, but the very next day you have the newspapers purveying it. Government's action, the steps taken, if there is a lockdown, if there are some lifting of restrictions, it has to be purveyed. The medium is the press. It has a responsibility of it. Predominantly, it is best left to self-regulation. But the need for an uninhibited free speech is an essence of democracy. It's an essential condition, they say, for an intellectually healthy society. And I will show you as we go along the classic passage, the most favorite passage of mine, in a concurring judgment in Whitney versus California. Louis Brandeis is speaking for the United States Supreme Court. Fairly long passage, but replay study, I would read it here, notwithstanding that it will take about 3 to 4 minutes on that. Free exchange in the marketplace of ideas. Abrams, you remember, there's a modification in the test there in Brandenburg, but it said you need to trade ideas in the marketplace. They call it the competition of the market, though he used the phrase marketplace. They call it marketplace of ideas, but he used it as free competition, and for the full blossoming of the personality. Fourth estate, a watchdog for democracy. Qualitatively different between the three organs, as I have told you. They have specific well-entrenched provisions, not only recognizing existence, but also a strong machinery in themselves. The privilege for the legislature, the executive machinery for the executive, the content power for judiciary. But the fourth estate very often post the infringement, or immediately when there is an apprehension, they approach the judiciary. So the best of the relationship has been with the judiciary. It has been deriving comfort from the lap of the judiciary. But it's an estate recognized as a fourth estate, but it is qualitatively different from the other three. So we'll need to see how an extra care can be infused to protect that right. Ramesh Thapar, the earliest case, very narrow and stringent limits have been set to permissible legislative abridgment of the right to free speech and expression. And this was doubtless due to the realization, and I'm reading it in the context of why free speech, that freedom of speech and of the press lay at the foundation of all democratic organizations. For without free political discussion, no public education so essential for the proper functioning of the process of popular government is possible. A freedom of such amplitude might invoke risks of abuse, but the framers of the Constitution may well have reflected what Madison, who said, the leading spirit in the preparation of the First Amendment of the Federal Constitution, that it is better to leave a few of its noxious branches to their luxuriant growth than by pruning them away to injure the vigor of those yielding the proper fruits. So let there be a few breathing space. There may be an abuse here and there. I don't have to take names. There have been. But a few black sheep will not determine what the extent of the right should be. That will be taken care of. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. See the view in England. Lord Bingham, a highly respected judge, the late Lord Bingham. Freedom of thought and expression is an essential condition of an intellectually healthy society. Imagine if we were to be in an Orwellian state, watched every moment, somebody breathing over our shoulder, we're not able to speak our mind, it will inhibit healthy debate. You will be shackled without arms. Voltaire's clarion call that I may disagree with what you say, but I will let you say what you want would be meaningless. Free communication of information, opinion, and argument about the laws which a state should enact, the policies its government at all levels should pursue is an essential condition of truly democratic government. These are the values which Article 10 of the European Human Rights Charter and the Article 10 of the UK Human Rights Act and the Schedule, and their importance gives it central role in the convention regime, protecting free speech in general and free political speech in particular. Then you see the other pillars. I've already told you about the Contempt of Courts Act. There are some self-regulated norms for restriction, but some very often violated. Legislative privileges, frequently used. They have been trigger happy, but the Supreme Court has said in the Keshav Singh case, the presidential reference, that unless the activity has nexus with the legislative function, you can't invoke it, and it is amenable to judicial review if there is illegality, a violation of fundamental rights, as opposed to mere irregularity. Don't take, refuge under the provision which says that the conduct within the house can't be inquired into, but if it is illegal, infringing a person's right, if you have sentenced the lawyer Solomon and the other party for an act which is found to be in breach without a procedure, we would step in. So when a privilege notice is issued, it is better to challenge it and get an order that no coercive steps, because they have power to arrest and to take them to the well of the house. Traditionally, we would wait for a reply and then sentence, because then you won't get any time between the sentence and moving the court. And then we go back to the three questions and cumulatively assess them. Look at what Justice Jackson, known for his felicitous expression, he was a judge, then as a judge went as prosecutor, as you all know, for the Nuremberg trial. He was a countryside practitioner. I read somewhere that even without a degree in law, but known for his felicitous expression, one of the most powerful judgments, the very purpose of a Bill of Right, and this is the real concept of fundamental right, was to withdraw certain subjects on the vicissitudes of political controversy, to place them beyond the reach of majorities and officials, and to establish them as legal principles to be applied by the courts. One's right to life, liberty and property, to free speech, a free press. It always goes together, it's understood commonly. Freedom of worship and assembly and other fundamental rights, may not be submitted to vote. They depend on the outcome of no election. They are withdrawn from the majority. No brute majority can take away the right. It's kept as part of the fundamental right. All that you can do is operate within the sphere of 19(2) with the limitations laid down by the court. And then, this is a report which people interested can study. This is the 2017 one. Couldn't get a later one. We tried to look for it. It highlights that media freedom has received threat from police, politicians from all hues. You remember in Tamil Nadu, the Legislative Assembly had proceeded against the editor of the Anand Vigadan, very popular journal. Every house would buy the Anand Vigadan and Kumudam. So was our house too. Mr. Balasubramaniam, the editor, had printed on the front page a cartoon which said there are politicians on the stage, two public from the audience group, one is asking the other. I will say it in Tamil. Empa idhila MLA yaru, MP yaru? The pickpocket மாதிரி இருக்காரு அவர் MLA, முகமூடி கொள்ளக்காரர் மாதிரி இருக்காரு அவர் MP. On this, a privilege notice was issued. The speaker said he had sky-high powers. It went to court, but ultimately I think he had to serve a sentence. But the law is that it should have nexus with the legislative activity. Defamatory actions have to be independently proceeded with. Then we see in the interface, let us see the Hoot Committee. Just see the right-hand column. There is some abuse from within. Yeah. Sand mining mafia, drug traffickers, non-state actors, highlights oppression against journalists, gag orders by judiciary. We'll see the Sahara judgment which postpones, gives a discretion to the judge to postpone the reporting. The Mirachkar case itself arose out of a gag order, but they said judiciary can't violate fundamental rights. But this power is with the judiciary. And they have said since the administration of justice is a primordial duty, anything which will come in the way can be temporarily postponed with great caution. They say we'll try and see that passage as we go down. Invocation of sedition provisions for hate speech. It's a point Gautam Bhatia makes that today people are made to, forced to speak, make hate speech, forced to swear by a certain, book which they may not believe in, attacked, the moral policing happens, the damage is done. So by then the damage is done, he says. You resort to an action thereafter. I remember Mr. Nariman, our eminent jurist, always would quote a Malaysian Supreme Court judge who told him the problem was not freedom of speech, it was freedom after speech, he would say. The Malaysian judge spoke. There's no problem with speech, I can speak. But the problem is freedom after my speech. I thought there was a very subtle and important distinction there. And media also exposed being hand in glove with political parties, all kinds of put up news, one-sided news. You need to see two channels, one for the plaintiff's version and another for the defendant's version, and for you to decide which is the correct version. In the context of the interface with the legislature, section 95 is an important section. All that the government needs to do is it appears to it where any newspaper, fourth line, or book or any document wherever printed appears to the government to contain any matter, the publication of which is punishable under 124A, 153A, sedition, hatred against government, obscenity. State government may by notification stating the ground of its opinion, declare every copy to be forfeited. The key word is appears. The word was subject of dispute in both Bargur Ramachandrappa and James Lane and the James Lane case. In Bargur Ramachandrappa, the court held the meaning of the word appear placed upon the government a lighter burden of justification than the word proved, because 95 was of a preventive nature. Or in other words, there is no need for any evidence that the requirement of 153A or 295A have actually been satisfied. All that is required is that it appear to the government that they have. In Sangraj Rupavate, the Supreme Court accepted this interpretation. So the threshold is kept very low. The point that is being made is the legislature, which ought to have provisions aligned to 19(1)(a), which ought to have a higher threshold, which ought to have a judicial oversight. I would prefer a judicial oversight before a ban. Why should the executive take upon itself the power? They would ban books which are not palatable to them. Put a judicial body, put a retired judge, statutorily created, whose opinion or a sanction is required. We've had such committees before when to prosecute people under TADA. We are having sanction to prosecute provisions. I'm only saying that in the importance of free speech, so that by the time the court orders, etc., you see the damage is done. So the threshold is deliberately kept low because the legislature has the power to make the law, and they ought to keep 19(1)(a) in mind and to have laws aligned to that. The idea is, you see, this and 66(a) as we go along, to restrict it straight away. To start with the negative. Now 66(a), this is an important judgment. We will see Shreya Singhal because it sets out the evolution. It sets out what is really an infringement, which speech can be prohibited. So today, unless you have an imminent threat of action or imminent threat of lawlessness, they expressly align to the Brandenburg test in the US. The free speech cannot be inhibited. And this provision, which was vague, was struck down. 66(a) of the Information Technology Act, which had its last right recently performed with the Apex Court in the Shreya Singhal case, a case which Repay study for each of you interested in. Most of you must have seen, but I'm seeing it from this slide. While there may justifiably be two views on the continuance of 124(a) sedition, there is still a problem with the exercise of that. The drop of a hat, people are prosecuted for sedition. The scope for abuse pregnant in the provision raises several questions. Why this antipathy is our question. Ought not these provisions be aligned to 19(1)(a)? Should they not be pro-speech? And this was the vague provision. Any person who sends by means of a computer resource or a communication device any information that is grossly offensive or of menacing character, or any information which he knows to be false, etc., etc. I'm not wasting time reading it. Point is, tomorrow you are faced with a client who is faced with a FIR by the government saying you put a Facebook post. I find it violative of this section of the IPC. I am prosecuting you. Must be able to move the court. If public servants facing corruption charges can have a screening mechanism in the form of sanction to prosecute, this is the point that I am trying to make. Why is there no screening mechanism here? At least, for the press, you call it the fourth estate, you say it will depend on the judiciary. All right, have a screening mechanism. Ought there not to be a provision creating a presumption in favor of the proponent of free speech, with an onerous burden cast on the person seeking to deprive it? Should not a screening mechanism also be put in place with a judicial oversight or an ombudsman before criminal defamation proceedings are initiated against the press to prevent the defamation laws from having a chilling effect on the press? Series of FIRs registered in genuine cases. Don't let your imagination go to some recent happenings. There are two sides to that story. There have been chilling effect FIRs. So, idea is, you see, we need the press. Can't look at it from the point of time when an X party is in power in the state or X party is in the center. For all times to come, we need some institutionalized protection. It may be defamation, it may be special statutes like this. What is the content, Shreya Singhal? The expression freedom of speech and expression. There are three concepts which are fundamental in understanding the reach of this most basic of human rights. The first is discussion, second is advocacy, and the third is incitement. Mere discussion or even advocacy of a particular cause, however unpopular, is at the heart of 19(1)(a). It's only when such discussion or advocacy reaches the level of incitement that 19(2) kicks in. It is at this stage that the law may be made curtailing the speech or expression that leads inexorably to or tends to cause public disorder, or tends to cause or tends to affect the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of state, friendly relations with foreign states, Why it is important to have these three concepts in mind is because most of the arguments of both petitioners and respondent tended to veer around the expression public order. The information sent as to be annoying, inconvenient, grossly offensive also shows that no distinction is made between mere discussion or advocacy of a particular point of view, which may be annoying or inconvenient or grossly offensive to some, an incitement by which such words lead to an imminent causal connection with public disorder, security of state, etc. This alone I will take you through fully, because after that we can just broadly. Then the Chaplinsky's case of the US, there also it kept evolving till they reached Brandenburg. Allowing the broadest scope to the language and purpose, it is well understood that the right of free speech is not absolute, no doubt, in all circumstances. You see, in the US, there is no restriction like 1902. This was debated in the assembly, and already Krishnamaiah has a passage saying, I would much rather embed the restriction in the constitution rather than leave it to the vicissitudes of judges, he says. There are certain well-defined and narrowly limited classes of speech, the prevention and punishment of which have never been thought to raise any constitutional problem. These include the lewd and obscene, the profane, the libellous, and the insulting or fighting words, those which by their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of peace. It has been well observed that such utterances are no essential part of any exposition of ideas and are such slight social value as a step to prove that any benefit that may be derived from them is clearly outweighed by the social interest. That is an obscene comment, patently obscene, needs no protection. What test you will apply to decide is a different matter. The Hickling test of the community standard test, will come to that. Pursuit of truth is not, negated by preventing obscene. Only thing you need to have a proper test to decide whether it is obscene. As stated, all of the above factors make a distinction between the print and other media as opposed to the internet, and the legislature may well therefore provide for separate offences so far as free speech over the internet is concerned. Therefore, an intelligible differentiation having a rational relation to the objects ought to be achieved, that there can be creation of offences which are applied to free speech over the internet alone as opposed to other mediums of communication. Thus, an Article 14 challenge has been repelled by us on this ground. That is saying that, you can't have offences based on internet communication. That government succeeded, but we do not find anything in the features outlined by the learned additional Solicitor General to relax the court scrutiny of the curbing the content of free speech over the internet. While it may possibly be narrowly draw a section creating a new offence, such as Section 69A, for instance, relatable only to speech over the net, yet the validity of such a law will have to be tested on the touchstone of tests already indicated. Then the test of clear and present danger has been used in many varying situations. And then it says to have repeatedly applied C. Terminello and this Brandenburg versus Ohio. Next case. Whitney has been thoroughly discredited by later decisions, except the classic passage of the concurring passage of Brandeis, which will still hold good. These later decisions have fashioned the principle that the constitutional guarantees of free speech and free press do not permit a state to forbid or prescribe advocacy or the use of force or of law violation, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So the nexus has to be there. The live link has to be there. Mere advocacy, they have protected it from action. Holmes never thought formally abandoning the clear and present danger. It has moved closer to the First Amendment ideal when he said in dissent in Gitlow, every idea is an incitement. It offends itself for belief, and if believed it is acted on unless some other belief outweighs it or some failure of energy stifles the moment at its birth. The only difference between the expression of opinion and incitement in the narrower sense is the speaker's enthusiasm for the result. Eloquence may set fire to reason, but whatever may be thought of the redundant discourse before us, it had no chance of starting a present conflagration. If in the long run, the beliefs expressed in proletarian dictatorship are destined to be accepted by the dominant forces of the community, the only meaning of free speech is that they should be given their chance and have their way. That's why they say, when we come to Whitney, we'll see the best way to silence free speech is by more speech. Silence by coercion is the worst form of interference. Silence by more speech. I say something, you tell me a better reason. Then I get silence because I find your reason more rational, acceptable. That is how you silence free speech. You don't silence by force, but you silence speech, if you want, by more speech and better reason. And this is a passage, my very favorite passage. just see the depth in the words. Brandeis concurring in Whitney, upholding the conviction. Subsequently, the law is now Brandenburg, but see this. Those who won our independence believed that the final end of the state was to make men free to develop their faculties. That in its government, the deliberative forces should prevail over the arbitrary, deliberative, free discussion. They valued liberty both as an end and as a means. They believed liberty to be the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. They believed that freedom to think as you will and to speak as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth. That without free speech and assembly, discussion would be futile. That with them, discussion offers ordinarily adequate protection against the dissemination of noxious doctrine. That the greatest menace to freedom is an inert people. That public discussion is a political duty, and that this should be a fundamental principle of the American government. They recognized the risks to which all human institutions are subject, but they knew that order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment for its infraction. That it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination, that fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and proposed remedies, and the fitting remedy for evil counsel is good one. Don't stop him, but give him better counsel. Believe in the power of reason as applied through public discussion. They eschewed silence coerced by law. I used the word force earlier. Don't silence them by law. Silencing coercion by law or coercing silence by law is the worst form of force, he says. Silence coerced by law, the argument of force in its worst form. Recognizing the occasional tyrannies of governing majority, they amended the constitution so that free speech and assembly should be guaranteed. Fear of serious injury cannot alone justify suppression of free speech and remedy. It's also part of the code. Men feared witches and burnt women. It's the function of free speech to free men from bondage of irrational fears. To justify suppression of free speech, there must be reasonable ground to fear that serious evil will result if free speech is practiced. There must be reasonable ground to believe that the danger apprehended is imminent. So, this has to be the approach in the formulation of legal provisions, in the exercise of power invoking those provisions. But what is happening is exactly the opposite. And if we are faced with a situation, we need to protect them by rushing to court. This is the privilege case where they say 19(1)(a) will cede to the privilege. But I would want you to see in greater detail Keshav Singh and those line of cases where they have said that illegality is available. Privilege invocation should be for an act which has nexus with the legislative function, not for writing a story about a minister whose husband had obtained a contract for a PWD road. Those are not breach of privilege matters, but this is how it is exercised. Now, after the legislature, look at the interface with the executive. Ban on entry and circulation, the Madras case, Ramesh Thapar. Brij Bhushan, pre-publication censorship matter. The other is a constitution of the wage board. But more importantly, Sakal paper attempt to regulate the number of pages as per the charge in orders. That is, the number of pages were sought to be regulated in newspaper. Banning publication of news on any subject matter. Re-entering the premises. You see, it need not relate to direct printing. What the test laid down in Bennett Coleman, which is the next case, is restriction on import. If the effect is the violation of free speech, the form of action taken doesn't matter. It will still be tested on the 19(1)(a) anvil. Restriction on import of newsprint looks like a customs matter, but actually for a newspaper industry, it is part of free speech. So is the re-entering of the premises. The 86(1) SEC, the famous case which is the Epicent, the fraud on power case. They have, the effect of it is felt, the reverberations are felt in 19(1)(a). Facially, it may be a lease deed violation of condition or lease deed clause invocation. Justice Brennan, speaking for the United States, the New York Times, the Sullivan, said profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, not roused, correct the spelling, and wide open, and that it may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attacks on government and public officials. The pall of fear and timidity imposed upon those who would give voice to public criticism, an atmosphere in which the First Amendment freedoms cannot survive. You remember when public officials are hauled up, our Nakiran Gopal's case also, if we had put that in here. The test is more rigorous. Unless it is reckless, they don't punish people for defamation against action against public officials, because public officials are subjected to rigorous standards. The same principle was available when Mr. Morarji Desai, a former Prime Minister, applied for defamation against Seymour Hersh. When we were growing up, this was a big story. And our Nakiran Gopal, Karar Gopal, reiterates that. Criticism, it should be sunlight is the best disinfectant. Criticize and correct. Or you repel the criticism by reason. Then, very often a fait accompli, which I mentioned, Gautam mentions in his book, with this moral policing forces taking over, and the real police remaining a silent spectator. Even after Kedarnath limited the sedition clause, in reality he says that it works differently. Fanatical groups call the shots. Music concert will not be held. Valentine's Day should not be celebrated. Press will not carry this. We have now had murders in the last 3-4 years. With respect to who is responsible, I am on the point that, damage is getting done before the right can be asserted and protected. Laments that whatever construction the Supreme Court places upon speech, implementation of the first instance is in the hands of executive authority. So ultimately, we are driving towards constitutional morality. We'll conclude with that when we come to the last slide. We are a few slides away now. Point is that, irrespective of what your provision is, we come back to this point. My favorite passage, Abu Rajendra Prasad, Dr. Ambedkar, saying that ultimately depends on men who implement it. In every sphere, collegium or NJSC, if you don't have, good of the system has to be kept in mind. In the other context, same here. Now, this is a case which will interest our audience. The Ore Oru Gramatile was banned, a forged caste certificate by the forward community, and the classic passage of Justice Jagannath Shetty concluding in his judgment. We end here as we began on the topic. Set aside the ban. Freedom of expression, which is legitimate and constitutionally protected, cannot be held to ransom by an intolerant group of people. Fundamental freedom under 19.1a can be reasonably restricted only for the purpose mentioned in 19.2, and the restriction must be justified on the anvil of necessity and not the quicksand of convenience or expediency. Open criticism of government policies and operation is not a ground for restricting expression. We must practice tolerance to the views of others. Intolerance is as much dangerous to democracy as to the person himself. The problem is it comes post the event. These values have to be imbued in people manning the three organs of government, so that in the enactment of laws, in the exercise of breach of privileged powers, the enforcement of executive action, in the decision-making process to initiate contempt or not by the judiciary, there is a mental inhibition that no, this is not fair, this is not done, this is not the law, this is not correct, should automatically act as a barrier. Judicial branch, you see, the best of relationship has been with the judiciary. It began with a very expansive interpretation in Thapa or in Brijbhushan. The little doubt that imposition of free censorship on a journal is a restriction on the liberty of press, which is an essential part of the right to freedom. Pointed out by Blackstone, the liberty of the press consists in laying no previous restraint upon publication and not in freedom from censure for criminal matter when published. Every free man has an undoubted right to lay what sentiments he places before the public. To forbid this is to destroy the freedom of press. Problem is, it shouldn't stay as the rhetoric. Now, how has the metamorphosis happened? I've told you that it is incitement and imminent threat of lawless action. Initially, Ramji Lal Modi said tendency to cause disorder, a very, very low threshold. Lohia brought in the test of intimate connection. Rangarajan brought in the spark in the powder keg. Shreya Singhal aligned all this and said, stuck to the incitement line. We have now aligned to the Brandenburg test. So today it is a very high threshold for the executive to establish. If it is advocacy, it won't even be sedition. However outrageous the statement may be, however immature the fellow who has uttered it be, one solo cannot, decide on the scope of our right. Hard cases cannot make bad law. We need to stick to the principle. Some noxious growth is all right. Some breathing space is okay. You remember that passage from Madison quoted in Thapa. Now, this is the other problem. The famous passage, we try to bring it in every discussion. The great tides and currents which engulf the rest of men do not turn aside in their course and pass the judges by. Sometimes they also get taken in by the surrounding circumstances. So a one-off bad case can lead to a bad law because after all, human beings, you see, the tides and currents don't say, oh, that's a judge's house, let me take the next street. It does engulf them. Now, this is an interesting area because when I say press, you will also have books. One was the Lady Chatterley Lover, the text which was circulated, 292 prosecution. Originally, there was this Hicklin test, which is now given way to the community standard test in Khushbu. Ranjit Udeshi said, law seeks to protect not those who can protect themselves, but those whose prurient minds take delight in secret sexual pleasure from erotic writings. No doubt this is treating with sex by an artist, and hence there is some poetry even in the ugliness of sex. But as Judge Hand said, obscenity is a function of many variables. If by a series of descriptions of sexual encounters described in language which cannot be more candid, some social good might result to us, there would be room for considering the book. So there is no other attraction in the book. Now, I'm going to show you a passage from Justice Harlan's passage in Cohen versus United States. He beautifully said, you can't judge by your subjectivity. You see, one man's obscenity is another man's lyric, he said. We'll come to that slide. But I must tell you that K. Abbas, Chief Justice Hidayatullah said, you must look at it not with a jaundiced eye. And the classic passage I remember, he said, just as it is wrongly said, he added that prefix, wrongly said of a Frenchman that he looks at a woman's leg in everything. Don't look at it from that perspective. Don't say that it is the prurient mind. But then the test has now got crystallized in Khushbu. She made a statement about how premarital sex and the live-in relationship, welcoming that, and that was, taken as a statement which was obscene. And today, the Supreme Court says we go by the modern standards, not by, the ancient beliefs or ancient, thoughts. Look at how they put it. There are numerous other decisions, both from India and foreign countries, which mandate that obscenity should be gauged with respect to contemporary community standard that reflect the sensibility as well as the tolerance level of an average reasonable person, not the weak, who will succumb to who will look at it in the wrong way. Bandit Queen, the scene where the dacoit and is abusing, physically abusing Kulan Devi, was thought to be banned by the censor board. There they applied and said, you can't look at it from that perspective. You should look at it saying that here is somebody who is abused. Law can't depend on the mind of the depraved, who would always, want to look at a woman's leg in everything, as it is wrongly said of a Frenchman. Always when you say this, say that it was wrongly said of a Frenchman, and we could get into trouble. In the present case, the appellant has merely referred to the increasing incidence of premarital sex and called for its societal acceptance. At no point of time the appellant described the sexual act or said anything that could arouse sexual desires in the mind of a reasonable and prudent reader. So this is the test: reasonable and prudent reader, not the depraved reader. Furthermore, the statement has been made in the context of a survey which has touched on numerous aspects relating to the sexual habits of people in big cities. Even though the survey was not part of a literary or artistic work published in a news magazine, thereby serving the purpose of communicating certain ideas and opinions on the above mentioned subject, the highlighted portion difficult to appreciate the claim that the statement published as part of the survey were in the nature of obscene communication. It will be relevant because you could have a book ban challenges which will arise. And this is the passage I told you from Justice Harlan, Cohen versus California. For while the word being litigated here is perhaps more distasteful than most others of his genre, I think this was the case where there was a 4-letter word on the t-shirt and it was going around. Nevertheless, often true that one man's vulgarity is another's lyric. Indeed, we think it is largely because governmental officials cannot make principal distinction in this area that the Constitution leaves the matter of taste and style so largely to the individual. Then the gag order I told you from the judiciary's point of view. Today, judiciary has stood by the press. It has raised a high threshold in favor of freedom of speech. It had resorted to a limited gag in a nature of a postponement on the principle that administration of justice is the end and purpose of all laws. If some damage is to be done to the witness or some such immediate, threat, then it's again imminent danger. It's only the judiciary applying it. The judiciary has to be very careful passing orders or to reporters saying don't report. Now, when we see the recent developments, Anuradha Bhasin challenge to the internet ban in Kashmir is only for completing the thread. Includes the right to disseminate information to a wide section of the population. The wider range of circulation is greater impact cannot restrict the content of the right nor it can justify. Confining ourselves to declaring that the right to freedom of speech and expression 1901 and the right to carry on is constitutionally protected. They applied it to the internet, right to have the internet also. Radhakrishnan concerned the banning of a book. So, usher in a perilous situation, etc. Here we may remind ourselves the expression used by George Orwell, the author of that 1984, the Orwellian state when we say, refer to him, free thinking and intellectual cowardice. Creative writing is contrary to intellectual cowardice and intellectual pusillanimity. These are some of the case law. Then this is that Bengali book, Ghost, Moro's Ghost or something. Justice Chandrachud says, and he quotes Voltaire, I despise what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. And Stuart Mill and Donald Dworkin, free speech is precondition not just for individual happiness, for a flourishing society. We have seen all this earlier. Then Subhash Chandra, the RTI case against the Chief Justice is a public authority, assets declaration, etc. They say there is no fiduciary duty in the assets declaration part. Then threats from within. Justice Chinnappa Reddy says that in his book, The Court and the Constitution, a very, very, very good book. I've read it. An interesting foreword by Dr. Baxi. Summit and Shallows. While Sakal paper and two Indian Express cases rarely deal with the rights of the press barons making use of the right to freedom of expression to expand their business activity. It's of course the typical Justice Chinnappa Reddy. It is of significance to note that no case of any journalist being denied the right to express himself has come before the court, but there can be no denial of the fact that the press barons too control the free expression of views. Those days, threats, and even now also, threat from within. You tell me the channel, I can tell you his slant on the news today. The Hoot report dealing with self-censorship proves that Justice Chinnappa Reddy was absolutely correct. Common knowledge that government gives a lot of advertisements to the press, and this is another problem. Today we are able to get a newspaper at abysmally low cost because it is heavily funded with advertisements. They are able to subsidize it and give it to you. Actually, the cost of the paper is much more than the 3 or 4 rupees we pay. It's because they get advertisements. Government gives largest advertisements. So they can control. So ultimately we go to the individual, you see. So Align with me, I give you the advertisement. If you don't align with me, we'll choke you for the advertisements. Free press is the lifeblood of democracy, cannot be doubted. Famous advocates of free speech like Michael John and James Madison support the theory that censorial power over government should vest in the people and not the censorial over people vest in the government. And not that the censorial over people vest in the government. So, how nicely put. Censorial power over government should vest in the people and not that the censorial over people vest in the government. And with that, we come back to what my favorite passage. However strongly worded the provision of the Constitution be, its efficacy will depend on the men and women who work it. Constitutional values embedded in our Constitution and the fundamental duties set out in 51A have to be internalized by different functionaries. The press is no exception. Any individual or body which claims, I say no exception because they ought to be responsible. A large part is left to self-regulation, rightly so. But they also need to maintain constitutional values, constitutional morality. Any individual or body which claims a right has also a corresponding obligation to discharge the duty vested in it. Only a responsible press which adheres to the journalistic dharma that can aspire for protection of its rights. Supreme Court in a recent judgment in Navtej Johar said, just brought in the constitutional morality passage. Concept of constitutional morality is not limited to the mere observance of the core principles of constitutionalism, as the magnitude and sweep of constitutional morality is not confined to the provisions and literal text which a constitution contains. Rather, it embraces within itself virtues of a wide magnitude, such as that of ushering a pluralistic and inclusive society, while at the same time adhering to the other principles of constitutionalism. It is further the result of embodying constitutional morality that the values of constitutionalism trickle down and percolate through the apparatus of the state for the betterment of each and every individual citizen of the country. And then, I conclude by saying that there is an imminent need for sensitizing the entire citizenry to the noble values embedded in the Constitution. To check any abuse of power or misuse of a right, legal sanction can only be one of the remedies. A long-term solution is to be found. A culture of constitutionalism with deep respect for the tenets enshrined in it has to come from within. In the end analysis, how do we pronounce? It cannot be said that in nearly 7 decades of functioning, free speech and free press have been totally had a raw deal. We cannot totally say that. We have not had an Khashoggi incident in the embassy, at least. We've had a couple of ones in the last 3-4 years, but when you look around and see some of our neighbors treating the press with total impunity, we have nothing to be ashamed of, but there's miles to go before we sleep. There's a long way to go. So my conclusion is that while press ought to be responsible and it needs to be self-regulated, freedom of press and freedom of speech are very essential for the sustenance of democracy, and a pro-free press attitude should permeate the functioning of the other three organs. An adequate protection machinery and fixation of higher threshold while hauling up the press ought to be, seriously considered. Thank you very much for your patience this Saturday afternoon, and thank you, Anirudh, for having me over. And this has been a learning experience for me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for such a wonderful presentation covering so many judgments, both Indian and foreign. It's been a wonderful learning experience for all of us. If you don't mind, we have a few questions. If we could,
Yes.
I think there are quite a few. Adarsh, do you want to?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the first question is how to address the dichotomy between freedom of press and individual privacy. Where should the press and the courts draw the line?
See, Adarsh, the traditional saying that my hand can extend till your nose applies here. Individual privacy is sacrosanct. Except in the case of public officials, then it is not their individual privacy, but the official actions for which they will be subjected to rigorous standards. The transparency is guaranteed. To that extent, they have no official, secrecy or privacy. But as far as individual privacy is concerned, if you want to write about someone, Manubhai Shah has said, cases abroad in England have said, I think the news of the world has always been in the news, that you ought to put it to him. If it is defamatory, you will face the consequences. But if you want to injunct him from publishing it, then the threshold is very high. If it is absolutely in violation of laws, if it is unnecessary to be purveyed, you may succeed on a rigorous standard. But if he there again comes and says, I am justifying it, then you cannot injunct. Damages would be the remedy. Except in the case of public officials where the threshold is low. Here the threshold may be high, but the press will put it to the individual, get his views and publish it. That is my answer.
So on similar lines, the next question would be, what is the test to be adopted by a court while passing gag orders at an interim stage?
You see, I showed you the Sahara principle, that postponement of the publication is in important matters where the test is, they have quoted Cardoso, that was part of my slide on the interface with the judiciary. If in the weighing of scales, grave damage, imminent damage would result to the administration of justice and the pursuit of truth there, a postponement order can result to be exercised very exceptionally under the Sahara versus SEBI order.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We have a couple of more questions. The next one is, how do you balance freedom of press with scurrilous writing?
You see, I told you that merely because a few of them abuse their right, you can't throw the right away. There are damages, there are provisions where you can sue them. Extreme cases, injunction, but if he comes and justifies it, court's powers are very limited. But you proceed on the basis that you see these black sheeps are bound to exist. That Madison's passage, that this noxious growth, that's the breathing space for the right.
So next question is, should there be restrictions on free speech with regard to pending criminal trials, so as to ensure that the media does not conduct their own trials?
Yeah, I think you have in England, etc. It is governed by the statute, but then on witness protection and other things. But we have our Sahara norm. So if you can make out a case that publishing this will cause a serious threat to the witness, and there's no other way of protecting and ensuring a fair trial, a postponement, can be obtained.
So next one is on, the question is, what is your opinion on free speech upon matters of faith? Because they tend to have an immediate effect leading to public disorder. What standard do you think the press should follow, and should it tread carefully in these matters?
See, the test is the same. The test is the same. The imminent threat or an imminent threat of lawlessness, not mere advocacy. If a good section, there are two views on temple entry or mosque entry, and if the right to advocate that, can never be stopped. You have to reason it out with each other so that you subdue the other by reason. The test is not going to be different. As to how it operates on a given situation, it will depend on the fact, but you need to have the Shreya Shingal test of not mere advocacy but incitement. The test is clear. How it operates on a particular field, in what situation, when. You see, an insightful speech on the foothills of a temple, or desecrating the deity when the procession is on, etc. You see, those are imminent situations. It has to be made out. But not, generally somebody is writing an op-ed in a newspaper criticizing a Supreme Court judgment granting a review hearing in a particular case, or not granting or taking a view in the final judgment, either way speech should be allowed. This is the principle. How far it is followed or is followed in the breach more is the reality.
So one more question. Given the rising tide of attacks on liberal authors and thinkers across the country by right-wing fundamentalists, what, in your opinion, can be done by the judiciary or even by other state instrumentalities to instill confidence in the free media?
I think this is very important. I told you the very concept of free speech and free press being part of the fundamental right is it is withdrawn from the majority. It is withdrawn from the majority. It doesn't depend on the vicissitudes of election. It doesn't depend on the vicissitudes of the numbers. That is why it's called a fundamental right. It's a limitation on the legislative power of the state. So judiciary should act immediately to stop that if possible, or follow it up with deterrent action. Legislature should step in to enact laws. But that's where the problem is, you see. The power to enact is with them. At some stage, like they did in telephone tapping, the PUDR case, and sexual harassment in the Vishaka case, since 21 and 191A also have facets of, according to me, positive obligation, and if there is inaction, court is going to step in, a powerful court will step in with its guidelines and not throw up their hands because there is no law enacting it. It has to be pro-speech because it's very essential for a democracy. People who in power at several points of time will realize the importance of free speech when they're out of it. So you need to have a common minimum standard on that. That is why ultimately it comes to the individual, you see. Whatever you go around, wherever, in whichever segment of the constitution, it is a constitution manned by people. You don't have robots manning it. So the individual has to ultimately be a man of metal in all branches of the state.
Yes, sir. Sir, do you have time for a couple of more questions?
Yes. We are only doing for no problem.
Yes, sir. On this similar lines to your previous answer, there is a question as to whether there exists a correlation between the press and the majority in the legislature. Because there seems to be an opinion that the press would probably work more efficiently if there is no absolute majority in the parliament.
See, there are two problems here. One is the fear of the press. Independent publishers, not backed by big barons, having an independent editorial policy, if they are subjected to attack, there is one form of threat. The other form of threat is powerful barons running the press, aligning with the majority, because there are scope for favors there. You need not be advertisement. Even scoop news be released in advance, increases the TRP of channels. There are 4 channels operating in the market. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
If there are 4 channels operating in the market and one is getting news early, the TRP is bound to increase. So then if TRP starts deciding everything, they align. So both are at fault.
The next question is,
so you need a measure like council, not so much to control, but come in when there is bad taste, when there is fake news, not so much as to inhibit, but there has to be a self-regulating body. That has to be an independent body, which acts as a watchdog.
So you spoke about fake news just now. In the same line, would you be able? Can you throw some light on the protection of sources for example, in a contempt action against a media house, because it could be fake news fed by
Others, can you repeat the question? I missed the whole part except that it was pertaining to fake news. Can you repeat the question, Adarsh?
Oh, yes, sir. Sorry. Can you please throw some light on the protection of sources, say in a contempt action against a media house? It could be fake news fed by a mischievous source. Can the media house be forced to divulge their source? Will it interfere with their freedom in any way?
See, once it is published, there is a law which says the printer and the publisher, I think section 7 of the act is very clear who takes accountability. While he cannot be forced to disclose, but he has to be accountable for the contempt action. As far as the court is concerned, he is the person on the face of it who is responsible. You cannot coerce anything without of him. It will be his journalistic, part of his journalistic privilege. But section clearly says that he will be accountable, and that's why in every newspaper they publish the name of the printer and publisher. It is statutorily required.
Sir, on similar lines, what is your view on the Republic TV editor-in-chief, Mr. Arnab Goswami's alleged defamatory statements against Congress President Sonia Gandhi and the recent mob lynching incident in Palghar district and several FIRs being filed against him in relation to that?
See, the matter is engaging attention of the court. Matter is engaging the attention of the court. We don't know about the truth of the news as reported, but if you are to apply the press standards, if there is a self-regulation required, that will have to be taken care of. But 10 FIRs simultaneously, it does cause a chilling effect. But if the incumbent, that will only be revealed in the investigation, has been irresponsible in reporting, he may be hauled up otherwise by his peer body. That's the problem, you see. When you get into a pending case, you keep aside, you take a hypothetical case. Such instances are bound to be there, is what they say. Then don't make this as a classic test case and lay down principles. So a genuine incident, I'm not saying what he said was not genuine or genuine, not taking a view on that. So that is being investigated. This should not deter people from investigating properly. But by all accounts, still, truth in any incident emerges. Sensationalism has not taken us anywhere.
So speaking of media standards, what do you think are immediate measures which the press in India can take to improve India's place in the World Press Freedom Index?
See, it has to be in the arena of self-regulation. They have a body. The broadcasters have a body. I happen to appear for them, decided by a Supreme Court judge. The publishers have a body, their guild. They have to be very active. They have to be conscious of their rights. At the same time, be equally conscious of the duties. Most of the press are responsible. But then it gets always compared by the black sheep, and are they able to stand up and pull up, name and shame the black sheep? That alone will enhance. A country with free speech and independent judiciary adds luster to the executive government. Why do we say a certain republic is a banana republic? We say that because there are no checks and balances. There is no constitution functioning. And why do we respect governments which are functioning under an independent judiciary and independent press? Because, you see, they have permitted the existence of that. So it is for the peer group to assert their independence, to highlight their duty, but it is best left self-regulated.
Yes, sir. Next question is, in the times of neoliberalism, is the press the only institute for achieving accountability, or should there be other institutes for achieving goals of transparency and accountability, perhaps?
Every instrumentality of the state, every organ of the state, except in matters where they are protected, and protection is the exception, have to be transparent. Press is only one aspect of the whole thing. Nobody wants opaqueness.
Yes, sir. We have one last question that we have. What is the role of the press when it comes to discourse of nationalism? Should they be an advocate of it, or should they refrain from promoting it?
I don't think the press can take that as the basis at all. A press has to report things as it is. Their primordial duty is to purvey and disseminate news without any gloss from their side. Their editorial policy should be of independence. They may carry articles with endorsements saying the views are of the author. They may have editorials which may be view of the newspaper. But ultimately, it has to promote constitutionalism. Nationalism may be very subjective. Nationalism should not mean that a wrong act of the government should be swept under the carpet for fear that it may be misunderstood as not being a patriot. Patriotism is different from false sense of nationalism. A press has a responsibility to act truthfully. Their pursuit is truth, and their four corners are the Constitution. They have a right of free speech, but there are a lot of duties which are embedded underneath, which they need to follow.
So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for patiently answering our question. I think we've exhausted the questions. Mr. Anirudh has a couple of words that he'd like to share. So over to you, sir.
So just one more question.
Yeah.
Before so, how does one address the issue of fake news? This itself may come under two categories. One may be where the media itself propagates the fake news knowingly, and the second could be where the source that the media relies upon propagates the fake news, and the media is only guilty of not properly verifying the same. How do you suggest that we deal with this? Because along with the freedom of media and freedom of the press, the responsibilities of the press would also be equally important in my view.
See, if it comes within the reasonable restriction clause, you can regulate it. But otherwise, there are provisions for defamation. There are other remedies for the individual. Then it should be left to self-regulation. Because as to who decides what is fake news, you see, either it should be the judiciary in an action brought within the provisions of law by the aggrieved party. But as I said earlier, a self-regulatory body with a powerful ombudsman would ensure, under the guise of regulating fake news, there should be no threat to the free press.
Yes.
At the same time, fake news should be prevented because it purveys wrong information. Now, where do you draw the line? Action within the corners of law as permissible in the Constitution. Self-regulation, individual redressal of grievances. You will have to operate within that.
Thank you very much, sir. And I know you've been extremely busy with a lot of video conference hearings and other talks. It was extremely nice of you to take out time to educate all of us on this topic. We've benefited immensely from the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a learning experience, and I hope it has been useful. And take care, all of you. Stay safe, and we will be through with this. And let us remain positive. And all the best to all of you. Thank you, Anirudh, for the opportunity to have an interaction with our brethren and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
God bless.
Been a wonderful session. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.